What's up, you guys? Thanks for clicking on the video. Before we get into it, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. So this time around, I wanted to talk a little bit about the UFC's competition. I think it's safe to say right now, the term casual, it doesn't just come from the fact that you only watch the popular UFC fighters. I think at this point, we could all agree that if you're only watching the UFC, you're absolutely a casual. Not only do we have Bellator, PFL, One Championship, we have a bunch of international brands that are absolutely killing it. I mean, though they're on UFC Fight Pass, you have Cage Warriors. Cage Warriors puts on a phenomenal show, brings forth phenomenal talent, and they even made their way over at California and they're taking over there. Aside from that, you also have Octagon MMA, who's putting on quality production, quality fights, and KSW. If you ever take a look at the crowds that KSW produces, whew, you'd be shocked. I mean, they are selling out jam-packed arenas. So, if you're only watching the UFC at this point, you're missing out. But anyways, the point of this video is for us to kind of have a little bit of discussion on how the UFC has been over the last few cards, where it could be headed, and whether or not their competition are letting a fire under their asses, for lack of a better word. Fairly recently, you have the Dana Whites of the world, the Mick Maynards of the world, kind of calling out MMA media for the fact that they're saying things like, these cards suck, these cards are not quality cards, we're not going to be tuning in, almost dissing the brand and the product. Though a lot of those media sites aren't wrong in the fact that if you look at the star power, it's very lackluster. But that doesn't mean that the cards are necessarily bad. I think if you're a true MMA fan, you can appreciate the fact that prospects turn into champions. Everyone has to start somewhere, right? But where I think the UFC kind of goes wrong in this case is the fact that there is no promotion. I mean, if you look at how much they threw into the promotion for UFC 289, it is insane. It was talked about during every break. There was a commercial after every fight. I mean, they're even saying you can get episode 3 of The Ultimate Fighter immediately following the main event. It seems to me that they're a little desperate, and they're starting to realize that they aren't generating enough stars to continue being relevant in this space. Now, I'm not saying that UFC doesn't have the best fighters in the world. They clearly do, but they're not limited to the UFC. Nowadays, you have promotions like Bellator, PFL, creating millionaires. Even Octagon MMA has a tournament going on at the moment. So I think it's safe to say that the landscape of MMA is evolving. And if you're a fighter, you have so many options for you. If you want to chase the bag, you have options. If you want to chase the legacy, you can go ahead and make 10K to start at the UFC. Now, you can't diss the UFC for what they did during the pandemic. I mean, they kept sports on. They were able to create a really unique experience where they had the UFC Apex, which I'm sure saved them a bunch of money. You had fighters who wanted to be active. But I think what happened over time is their roster has been oversaturated by Dana White Contender Series fighters. Because of that, the UFC has been able to save a ton of money, essentially signing prospects that are desperate to chase that legacy and make more money than they're already making on the regional scene. The regional scene does not pay that well, but they're getting shitty contracts. It's absolutely insane. Let's be real. Not only do fighters have to pay for their own training and their own medicals, they also have to take a cut of their paycheck and give it to their management, their coaches. So I think it's safe to say that if you are an entry-level UFC fighter, it's almost not worth it unless you know how to market yourself, you know how to utilize social media to your advantage. You're monetizing social media platforms to your benefit, but let's be real, not all fighters know how to do it, and those that do don't know how to do it well. So now you have this roster that is oversaturated with Dana White Contender Series fighters making mediocre paychecks who are praying and hoping that they get a performance or a KO bonus that aren't even getting promoted. I don't hate the fact that UFC is starting to put on main events like Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi. It's needed. I mean, if you're going to try and build stars in that next generation, or even title contenders, these fighters need to get experience fighting 5 rounds in the UFC. I think what the UFC is starting to realize is that they need to tend to the future generations if they want to remain relevant in this space. If you take a look at Bellator's roster, they have a bunch of prospects that they're getting in early on. Now, for those of you with ADHD, I'm not saying the UFC is going to go downhill tomorrow. I'm talking in 5 years from now, if they're not making these necessary changes, they are going to have a problem. And if we're being 100% honest, their competition is slowly but surely catching up and closing that gap. Now, I'm not saying that their rival promotions are perfect in any way, because let's be real, the PFL needs to figure out how to get fans in the stands despite all of the investor money coming in from high-level celebrities, and Bellator really needs to market their cards better. They put on some phenomenal cards, but some of them just go over our heads. So do the UFC have the best fighters in the world? Sure. Do they have them all? Absolutely not. Take a look at Bellator's pound for pound list. Take a look at their top 15 rankings within each division. Same with PFL. Listen, I understand PFL has a lot of ex-UFC people, a lot of veterans under their roster, but they are slowly starting to build homegrown talent that is absolutely needed. We saw that with Brendan Loughnane getting knocked out yesterday. Though it came as a surprise, I think it's something that we have to expect moving forward. The reason why I can say this confidently, being an ex-manager myself, I understand the landscape. This isn't no NBA, NFL, despite how they promote it. There's barely a free agency. There is no one way to get to the UFC. You aren't entering a draft and somehow getting drafted to the big leagues. It's all on which management you sign to and whether or not they are well acquainted with matchmakers and promoters from the big league promotions. That is the best way I can say it. Simply put, that's how you get into the UFC. So, no, the UFC does not have all the best fighters. They just have the best fighters signed from managers who they are friends with. You see managers going on vacations with the UFC matchmakers all the time. You have Ali inflating the PFL roster with all of his talent. And aside from that, whether you're a Bellator fighter, a PFL fighter, a UFC fighter, a regional fighter, they all train together. So it'd be very interesting to be a fly on the wall in those gyms, because I'm sure we would see UFC fighters not the best fighters in the room. But I want to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below if you think that the UFC's competition is sneaking up, if you believe that the UFC has all the best fighters in the world and have no competition, that if you sign to the UFC, you are better than fighters in Bellator, PFL, One Championship, KSW, Octagon MMA, Cage Warriors, so on and so forth. Let's have a discussion. I personally love all MMA. Doesn't matter what promotion, I watch it all. So it's been really refreshing to see that MMA fighters, they have options now. And if you love the sport, you'd be happy for them too. Anyways, thanks for listening, guys. Before we get out of here, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and set those post notifications so you can get notified every time we go live or we post any videos, including fight interviews, reviews, so on and so forth. Till next time, deuces.